Welcome to a place where stories of love are told not in shallow words, but in the raw depth of the heart. Here, it's about the stolen glances that turn into storms, the unspoken tension that grows until it breaks, the fire that erupts when passion can no longer be held back, and the surrender that comes when fear bows to the truth of the soul. These are not fleeting tales. They are journeys of connection that defy age, rules, and time itself, stories that show how love burns, heals, and transforms. Every word is spoken as if lived, every silence heavy with meaning, every moment alive with intimacy and truth. If you've ever longed for stories that make you feel, ache, and remember the power of love, you've found your home. The first time it happened, it was so subtle that it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. A glance that lingered one heartbeat longer than it should have, eyes meeting and refusing to let go when they should have looked away. But in that instant, something unspoken stirred. It was not loud, not obvious, yet it carried the weight of a secret too powerful to be ignored. It was the kind of tension that doesn't need words, the kind that steals the air from the lungs and leaves silence humming with meaning. Each encounter after that became a test of restraint. Casual conversations laced with undercurrents, a brush of closeness that seemed ordinary to anyone watching but carried the burn of fire beneath the surface. The world around was unaware, yet inside every moment, every stolen look, there was an electricity that seemed to crackle in the air. A forbidden pull was building, growing stronger with each passing day, and it became impossible not to feel it. There were moments when distance seemed safe, when pulling back felt necessary, when silence was the only shield. And yet, the silence itself betrayed everything, because in the quiet, the truth only grew louder. Eyes would search for each other in a crowded room, not daring to linger too long, but never able to resist. The longing in those fleeting seconds carried more than hours of spoken words ever could. The body betrays what the heart tries to hide. The slight quickening of breath, the sudden awareness of space, the rush of heat that spreads without permission when standing too close. No matter how carefully the mind insisted on barriers, the soul knew no rules. The soul kept reaching, kept leaning toward what it wanted most, as if drawn by a force beyond reason. There is a kind of desire that does not announce itself in bold gestures. Instead, it waits quietly in the shadows of restraint, sharpening itself in silence, growing stronger through denial. That was the kind of desire that lived between these moments. Every glance was a spark. Every silence a flame. Every smile that lingered too long felt like stepping closer to a truth that could not be hidden forever. There was fear, of course, fear of what it meant, fear of what others would say, fear of crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. And yet, beneath all the fear, there was a certainty, because no matter how wrong it might seem to the world, no matter how dangerous it felt, the heart recognized what it wanted. And what the heart wanted could not be reasoned away. There were nights when memories of the day would replay endlessly. The way laughter carried, the way eyes softened when they met, the way silence filled with meaning that words could never hold. Those memories lived like a secret flame in the chest, flickering in the darkness, warming the places that had long gone cold. Each memory became a whisper of what was waiting, a reminder that something powerful had already begun. And still, nothing was spoken. The silence itself became intoxicating. Every day, a careful dance between control and surrender. It was in the small things, the brushing of hands that seemed accidental, the leaning in just a little too close, the pause in conversation that felt like standing on the edge of confession. None of it was enough to be noticed by the world, but it was everything to those who felt it. The longing built like a storm behind closed doors. Every suppressed word, every hidden glance, every unspoken thought gathered strength until the weight of it pressed against the chest, demanding release. It was not a question of if the storm would break, but when. The desire was no longer just hidden. It was alive, pulsing, refusing to be ignored. What makes it unforgettable is not the moment itself, but the anticipation before it. The long stretch of silence, the endless pull of restraint, the aching sweetness of waiting, the kind of waiting that sharpens every sense, that turns a single touch into an explosion, a single glance into fire. That was the essence of the unspoken tension, the quiet that carried more passion than 1,000 words could ever express. It was impossible to deny anymore. Even in the silence, even with nothing said, the truth was already written across every look, every breath, every heartbeat. And the truth was simple. Something forbidden had already taken root, and it was growing too strong to be silenced. The eyes said it all long before lips ever could. It began the way storms often do, quiet, almost deceptively gentle, a whisper of something shifting in the air before the sky finally breaks. For so long, restraint had been the only shield, the only way to keep what was happening hidden beneath control. Every glance, every fleeting brush of closeness, every stolen silence had been contained, folded back into careful denial. But denial can only hold so much weight before it shatters. That night, the weight finally became unbearable. There was nothing special about it at first. The same walls, the same quiet hours, the same familiar space that had seen 100 unspoken moments before. But the air felt different, heavier somehow, charged in a way that made every breath feel stolen. There was no grand decision, no plan, only the raw truth of what had been waiting too long to be set free. Eyes locked, and suddenly the silence wasn't safe anymore. It wasn't the shield it had been. It became the spark. Words died on the tongue, replaced by the thundering of a heartbeat that seemed to echo in the chest, each beat calling for something more, something that could no longer be denied. That was the moment hesitation finally gave way to touch. The first brush of skin was electric, a current that surged through every vein, igniting everything it touched. It was almost frightening in its intensity, the way a single touch could unravel months of restraint in an instant. The body moved before the mind could catch up, guided by a force older and deeper than reason, and once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Hesitation melted into fire. What had been carefully hidden beneath silence erupted into something raw, untamed, overwhelming. Every touch carried the weight of all the moments before, the longing, the fear, the endless restraint. It wasn't just passion, it was release, a flood that had been dammed for too long. And once the dam broke, the flood consumed everything. The closeness was dizzying, the warmth of skin against skin, the urgent need that seemed to drive every motion, the taste of breath shared in the smallest of spaces. It wasn't polished or perfect. It was desperate, aching, the kind of intimacy born from holding back for too long. Hands moved as if memorizing, claiming, discovering what had already been known in silence but never touched until now. Time ceased to exist. Minutes blurred into one another, every second swallowed by the intensity of what was unfolding. There was no room for thought, no space for doubt, only feeling, raw, consuming, undeniable. It was as if every hidden glance, every quiet ache, every suppressed desire had been waiting for this single breaking point. And when it came, it consumed both body and soul alike. Fear had no place in that moment. Judgment, hesitation, rules, all of it burned away in the fire that had been ignited. What remained was pure truth, unshaken and unashamed. The truth that this connection was more than attraction, more than desire. It was something deeper, something elemental, a bond that had been there all along, waiting for the courage to finally breathe. Every touch spoke louder than words could. Fingers tangled like promises, lips pressed like confessions, bodies moving in a rhythm that belonged to them alone. It was not about possession, not about control. It was about surrender, giving in completely to what had already claimed the heart long before this night. And in the surrender there was freedom, freedom from restraint, from silence, from the endless ache of longing. Freedom to feel everything fully without apology, without fear. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also the most natural thing in the world, as if this was where the story had always been leading, as if every moment of hesitation had been leading here, to this breaking point. When the storm finally began to calm, when the fire softened into warmth, the silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of denial, no longer heavy with what was unspoken. This silence was different. It was filled, saturated with what had just been revealed, a silence that no longer carried the ache of restraint, but the peace of truth finally released. The breaking point was not just about passion. It was the moment when the heart's truth could no longer be hidden, when the body finally mirrored what the soul had known all along. It was the moment of becoming whole, of stepping into something that could never again be silenced or denied. And as breath steadied, as warmth lingered in the space between, one truth remained unshakable: nothing would ever be the same again. Fear was the first companion that came after the fire. It crept in quietly, wrapping itself around every thought, whispering questions that had no easy answers. What would people say if they knew? What would it mean to step so boldly across a line that most would never dare to touch? The fear was not only of judgment from the world outside, but also of the fragility within, the possibility of losing everything before it had even fully begun. It is one thing to desire in silence, to hide behind glances and secret longing. It is another thing entirely when that silence breaks, when passion erupts and the truth can no longer be buried. Once that truth is set free, the heart can't retreat into safety. The heart knows what it wants, and in that knowing, fear becomes a shadow that follows at every step. The age difference, the unspoken rules, the weight of expectations, all of it felt like heavy chains that could not easily be broken. In the quiet moments after, when the fire softened into tenderness, those chains tightened again. Questions circled endlessly. Was this wrong? Was it reckless? Was it something that would destroy more than it built? But beneath every question, beneath every wave of doubt, there was something even stronger, the truth that the heart had already chosen. That choice had not been made in a single night, nor in a single touch. It had been building silently for so long, through the glances, the unspoken words, the quiet electricity that refused to fade. By the time passion broke through restraint, the choice was already sealed. The heart had already surrendered even before the body followed. Surrender is not easy when fear is loud. It demands a kind of courage that feels almost impossible, because it is not the courage of defiance. It is the courage of honesty. Honesty about desire, about need, about the truth of connection that the world might never understand. It is terrifying to look at that truth directly, to accept it fully, knowing that doing so leaves no way back to the safety of denial. The fear was real. It pressed against every moment, a constant reminder of how fragile everything could be. But the more fear pressed, the more the heart resisted it, because the more the heart loved, the more surrender became not just a choice but a necessity. To deny it would be to live half a life, to walk through days with a secret ache that would never heal. To surrender, even with all the risks, was to live fully, to finally step into the truth without disguise. There were moments when the fear almost won, moments when pulling away seemed like the only way to survive, when the mind screamed louder than the heart. But every time distance was attempted, it failed. The pull was too strong, the bond too deep. It was not a matter of weakness. It was a matter of inevitability. Some connections are written into the soul long before they are ever spoken into existence. And once revealed, they cannot be undone. Surrender did not come all at once. It was a process, a slow unraveling of defenses, a gradual acceptance of what had already been decided within. It was in the way hands no longer hesitated to reach, the way eyes no longer darted away in fear of being caught, the way every moment together began to feel less like danger and more like home. Fear still lingered, but it became softer, overshadowed by the undeniable comfort of love that refused to be silenced. It is a strange thing to realize that the very thing once feared most, being seen, being judged, being vulnerable, became the very thing that gave strength. Because surrender was not about giving up. It was about choosing truth over denial, choosing love over silence, choosing to step across the lines not with recklessness, but with the certainty that the heart had already chosen long before the mind ever allowed it. The surrender was not loud, not dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like finally breathing after holding breath too long. It was lying in silence together without needing words. It was the warmth of skin pressed close without fear of what came after. It was the soft acceptance that no matter how terrifying the world's judgment might be, what lived between them was worth every risk. And when surrender finally came fully, when fear no longer dictated every thought, the love became deeper, freer, more unshakable. Because surrender was not weakness, it was the bravest act of all. The heart had already chosen, and there was never truly another choice left but to follow where it led. After the fire came the quiet, but it was not the same silence as before. The silence before had been heavy with denial, suffocating with what was left unsaid, a silence filled with tension and restraint. This silence, the one that followed after everything was finally surrendered, was different. It was soft, almost sacred, like the world itself had shifted and settled into a new rhythm. It was the kind of quiet that carried peace, the kind that lingered in the heart long after the body had calmed. At first there was disbelief, as though what had happened could not possibly be real. Passion is often mistaken for something temporary, a flash of fire that burns hot and then disappears into ash. But this was not that. Every look, every touch, every breath carried a weight that lasted far beyond the moment. It was not just desire satisfied, it was truth uncovered, and once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. The realization grew slowly in the tender aftermath of closeness. The way hands found each other without thought, the way words softened when spoken in the quiet, the way eyes lingered not with hunger anymore, but with something deeper, something infinite. It was in the laughter that came easier now, in the comfort of knowing that nothing had to be hidden anymore. What was once secret had become undeniable, and in that certainty there was freedom. Time seemed to move differently in those days. Hours felt shorter, nights felt longer, but every moment was saturated with meaning. Even the simplest things, the brushing of fingers across skin, the sound of a voice breaking the silence, the warmth of a body close, felt like treasures to be held onto. It was no longer about the rush of passion alone. It was about the bond that had formed in the fire, one that refused to be shaken by anything outside. The fear of judgment did not vanish, but it lost its power. Whispers of what others might say still lingered in the back of the mind, but they no longer defined the choice, because what was shared now was not fragile, not easily broken. It was strong, unshakable, the kind of connection that could withstand storms. The bond had been tested by silence, strengthened by restraint, ignited by surrender, and it endured because it was never built on weakness. It was built on something eternal. There were moments of wonder, almost disbelief, at how something so unexpected could become so essential. The difference in age, the weight of rules and expectations, the lines that had once seemed so impossible to cross, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of what was real. What mattered was the way the soul recognized its match, the way the heart knew where it belonged. It was as if time itself bowed down, as if rules and barriers could not stand in the presence of something so undeniable. What followed was not just passion, but a deepening, a weaving together of two lives in ways that could not be undone. Conversations that stretched into the night, filled not only with laughter and longing, but with dreams, fears, truths laid bare, intimacy that went beyond the physical, into the kind of closeness that only comes when two people allow themselves to be fully seen. The connection deepened not because of the fire, but because of what the fire revealed, the raw, unfiltered truth of love that had been waiting to bloom. The realization struck hardest in the quiet moments when the world felt far away. Waking up to the sound of steady breathing beside, feeling the warmth of skin pressed close, knowing that this was not fleeting but lasting. It was not just about nights of passion. It was about mornings of peace, about the comfort of knowing that this bond had carved its place deep into the soul. There was a beauty in the permanence of it, the knowledge that this connection would not fade with time, that it would not be diminished by age or circumstance. It had already defied the rules, already broken through the barriers that were meant to contain it. And in doing so, it had proven itself stronger than anything that could stand against it. The love was no longer a secret longing, no longer a forbidden fire. It had become a foundation, something unshakable, unforgettable, eternal. A bond not written by the hands of others, but etched into the very fabric of two souls. And in that realization came peace, the peace of knowing that what was found was not fleeting, not fragile, but the kind of love that carries through lifetimes. It was never just passion. It was destiny. If this story touched you, let your heart stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe for more true deep love stories that awaken the soul.